you can learn it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's that.
No. Okay. So I suppose I wasn't quite thinking through the title. It was supposed to be HOT, but anyway, that's fine. So I'm actually just a developer, but I suppose my mind's wired a little differently. And I work for Voss with that fine gentleman, and I help run BSidesCapeTown. Is there any way to set the volume a bit lower? Is it too loud? Is it fine?
Perfect. Sounds good.
Yeah. Just a disclaimer, this doesn't quite reflect Voss's ideas. This is my own talk and my own time. So, before I get any further, does anyone know what happened on the 30th of last month? Except for you.
Anybody who is involved with the loss? Anybody who is now about maybe?
Specifically? Yeah. But what about it? Here we go. Okay, so we got involved with that as BSidesCapeTown, and BSidesCapeTown being an NGO, we sort of sourced whoever we had that would listen to us. So just quick before I go on OWASP, I've gotten a lot of weird questions about this. It is non-profit. We don't ask anyone to pay to come to our things. And in fact, we're not trying to really do our own thing. Like, we try to get involved with Xerox Coffee and Zetecon as well. The idea is just that we have an interest in security, and OWASP has some really interesting tools and resources that's open to everyone. And we help a little bit on some of the projects, and then obviously you've got the local chapter, and thanks to OWASP we were able to procure some merchandise. So if anyone wants, there's a limited amount of t-shirts, but we've got stickers as well, and we've got the training room at the end. And then on the cybercrime bill, not to get into it too much, but the EFF and the Right to Know campaign, so the good EFF, very difficult because they both have the same color scheme going as well. So any of my friends that are non-technical, it's really hard to tell them, you know, I support the EFF.org. That always helps. So they have a little sign up where you can protest the cybercrime bill. And we did open comments that we've sent to the guy who actually wrote it, and hopefully that's going to help. The EFF also sent in a submission, and then Mark Hay, a guy we work with, he's an advocate with the CISSP. He also is going to submit on the 11th. So even after comments, it still has to be voted in. So if you don't agree with it, I've seen some sentiment about it online. And I suppose there is a good reason for this bill, but some of the wording is terrible, and the fact that you're guilty until you can prove you're innocent doesn't fly with me at all. So I'd rather oppose it and have it redrafted than just let it pass. Also, I don't see the point of having stuff like copyright law in a cybercrimes bill. That's a separate issue. Anyway, so kind of the agenda that I have is I'm going to do a brief talk on just sort of the Internet of Things and what I gathered it's actually about, because it's quite a marketing buzzword. So forgive me for whenever I say anything that sounds like a marketing speech. And then what I found in the wild, sort of looking around, I try to limit my sort of scope to anything remote. So Wi-Fi or over the internet. I didn't go into Zigbee, Bluetooth low power, stuff like that. I also was a little limited to the access to devices that I had. I ordered some devices online. Some of them got here in time, some of them didn't. Then I looked at a WASP top 10 because that's quite a good reference for what's wrong with some IoT devices. And funny enough, a lot of it coincides with the top 10 for web applications, because essentially a lot of Internet of Things devices have a web server running on it and a web application. And then I'll show you some embedded devices. So a lot of my actual breaking into devices was mostly embedded. I didn't quite feel like just hacking into everyone's device on the internet. And then sort of what we can do to fix it. So there's kind of an image that just explains what. So essentially the Internet of Things is every company that used to make a physical thing, or even a company that wrote some kind of API at some point decided, hey, let's all connect this to the internet. And it's, in some aspects, early IoT has the same kind of problems that you saw with you know, the Stuxnet kind of stuff. We have industrial control systems that were vulnerable. You have one little internet-connected device talking on a proprietary or weird protocol to physical devices that weren't very intelligent. So this was also kind of a good reference of what it sort of is, you know, network or internet-connected devices. And that's important because a lot of it's sold as we're going to capture all this data and we're going to show you what's going on in your network or your house or your company, and you know, we're going to profit from it, or everything's going to be better. And as much as it says the Internet of Things, most of the devices you find outside are very much limited to either some kind of control hub, like especially home automation, you have a hub in your house and then all the devices connected to it, or some kind of API or cloud service. I mean, I went to a talk by Ericsson that's building a cloud service to connect the Internet of Things. Some interesting ideas, but it seems like we're pushing out features faster than we can actually comprehend what we're going to do with it. And then a lot of the issues in IoT is sort of found in these barriers and market drivers. So cost is a major issue. Now, some of the issues that I see with IoT is what you saw early in web applications and when the web started blowing up is limited devices, you know, you're making the same kind of mistakes. And when cost is the issue, you might not have a full Linux device running, so you're very limited to what you actually can do or how you can protect yourself. I mean, it has to be low cost, it has to be able to just be thrown out there and run itself. And then obviously everyone's sort of funding this because it's a lot of money in it. And supposedly billions of devices will be connected in the future. And Africa is also being targeted for this, although there is some limitations to that, because we have the best internet infrastructure in the world. This gives you an idea of some of the devices. So these are more embedded, very small embedded or real-time operating systems as well. So you get obviously Linux devices, but they're somewhat limited because you need a little bit more hardware to run it. Riot is interesting in the sense that it's 4 C files running the whole operating system. It needs 1.5 kilobytes of minimum RAM and 5 kilobytes of ROM. And then you get TinyOS, Contiki, EmbedOS. There's literally a mass of devices and operating systems out there. And then I found some funny, you know, tweets, especially from this guy. He had some interesting stuff. He was talking about the VTech hack and the Barbie hack as well. And I got this from a WASP again. And the thing with IoT is you have so many aspects to actually look at. And it's sort of easy sometimes with web application development because you've got a nice framework worked out or a stack that handles quite a few of these things. And also with IoT is that you have physical access to the device sometimes. And that you can't really guard against. If you've got UART connected to it, you're pretty much at the shell already. And then the cloud, so we're trying to roll out physical devices and then connecting them to a virtual device. And that sometimes has its issues. So I had a lot of fun with Shodan. You will not believe it, you can find on Shodan. And I forgot to put the link for this in here, but if you email me, there's a link that if you've logged in and created an account for Shodan, it was some African conference, and if you put that URL in and you logged in, you get more access for free. And the API is amazing. I wrote quite a few Python scripts, pulled massive data, and I mean, you can automate all kinds of crazy stuff with that. Then I also found this, Census. Somebody emailed me about it. It's a university project exactly like Shodan, a bit more limited because they're still developing it. But with Shodan, you have to pay for some of your membership. This is open and free, and a lot of functionality as well. Also API, and beautiful. So what can you kind of find on the internet? So that's actually my own terminal, and that is a measurement system. I've just blacked out this device's name because it's not actually the device necessarily, but it was a pretty good picture of what that actually is. So a lot of fuel stations in America have this old device that's connected to their fuel pumps, and if you telnet to it, the only thing you have to do is Control A and then 20,100, and then that's it. Tells you how much fuel's in their tanks. You can also set pressure, release pressure, there's all kinds of madness. And when they found this, there was about 68,000 devices. There's 38,000 still in Shodan. Anyway, so there's this as well. I haven't found it myself. I tried to look around for it, but I actually think it only went on sale recently. And people are raving about how your kids' chats with each other are being sent back, or chats with the doll rather. Then this is an interesting study I did. Well, there's a couple of videos where a bunch of security consultants found a lot of vulnerabilities in this. And this is also unique because the company, and this is a trend that I found a lot, is IoT is very big on crowdfunding. And a company will get out the door quickly, build a device, put a firmware on it, it's got a cloud infrastructure to actually use it, and then a year down the line they run out of money. Someone buys them, open sources it, but the cloud infrastructure is off. So either you go and they open source the actual server for it, so you might as well register the domain and these devices start talking to you, or you could set up a Raspberry Pi or your own cloud service and talk to these. And this is kind of a trend that I saw, is that the big corporates are a bit better with the cloud infrastructure because they can keep it running. As soon as it's off, your device is kind of useless. And who do you call for a company like that? This is also interesting. So I haven't actually been able to get into this, but there is a couple of disclosures for the security in this and updates. So that's a wind generation. It's a little, what do you call that?
Wind generator.
It's a wind generator you hook up to your house and then to the internet, so that you can see how much load you have in your system. And running Linux, old versions of Apache 1.3.31, something like that. And this is where I start getting uncomfortable. So what that is this. Not necessarily that, well, it is actually that company. Not that their name's on it, but I would just ignore the link at the bottom. But it's not, no, but that isn't actually them. I just copied the last slide, the wind generator. But the problem is here, this is exactly what I was talking about before. This is more like industrial control systems. So a lot of these devices will have some kind of connection to it, and there's always been some kind of modem that could connect to them, but they didn't call it Internet of Things then. Now they're hooking up Wi-Fi and all kinds of crazy stuff to your HVAC system, so your heat, electricity on the roof, and I really don't think that should just be out there unnecessarily. Exactly, there we go, Mr. Robot. So, and I found scanning this, I also found some really weird issues that picked up, but yeah, also you can see all the JavaScript to log in, and I don't know if this is such a great idea. At least put it behind a VPN. You've got the money to do it. And I mean, if you hate your competitor, drive up his electricity costs for a month. Then I found this. I'm not quite sure what it does. It's called Thingful. Now, I don't know if it's live. I don't think they have an API for it yet, but basically either it's live or you register your device online, and that's what the world looks like, supposedly. So that's a Raspberry Pi in Cape Town. So I found quite a few Raspberry Pis on Shodan as well. And then it starts getting rather obscure. So there's a fishing boat. There's some kind of power generation. A shark has been tracked. 11 foot 6 inches, a rather big shark. And labeled as immature. I don't know about 11 foot and 6 inches as immature. And there was quite a few sharks as well. So this is still beta. So I don't know how this works, but really interesting. And then personal weather station. So some interesting stuff, some data on that. So then we get to the OWASP IoT top 10. So a lot of these kinds of things you're just going to see in web applications as well. So a lot of these had an insecure web interface. There's a lot of cross-site scripting, just all kinds of madness, insufficient authentication. This I found a lot. Some have no auth, some have some guy puts his Raspberry Pi up with the default credentials and stores all his documents on there, which is lovely. Weak passwords was a big thing, and also a lot of these smaller devices. So here's a good example, I suppose. It's running a really small firmware. It doesn't have hashing and stuff built in. So they're storing on the ROM in clear text passwords and auth. So that was a HomeSeer home automation device with no auth. You just go to the URL and yeah. Anyway, this one. So this guy just publicly. Anyway, so that's not going to work now. Sorry. So this was interesting. He's seen this as well. I actually wanted to show it just as an example. So it's an ESP8266, which I have here. If you guys want to pass it around and have a look. I mean, that web server is that size. Sorry. Anyway, so the funny thing is this guy has gone and set up his whole Wi-Fi and everything on there. And the funny thing is you see Wi-Fi password and the little dots. You just change that in the HTML to text and you see his password. And you've got his sensors, you've got his settings, you can restart the device. I tried to see if he did firmware upgrades over the air, but I don't think he has that feature on, because that was kind of what I was going for most of the time, is that a lot of these devices, even as small as they are, have a firmware update over the air functionality. A lot of them just end up being either FTP or a full-on over TCP firmware upgrade. Insecure network services, so a lot of unnecessary open ports. Telnet is rife in the Internet of Things, UPnP as well. Lack of transport encryption. This is the definite issue with IoT. So none of these stacks, some of them will have some kind of encryption maybe, or some implementation thereof, and the other problem is that proprietary implementations are also an issue. Then privacy, obviously, so to some extent privacy is an issue, but considering that when you're doing this device, you have to think a little bit like, what am I going to use this for? If you're doing health data and all kinds of stuff like that, probably have a secure API and encryption. If it's a little weather station, you probably don't have to have so much. Try and compartmentalize what you're actually doing with it. Insecure cloud interface, and this came out a lot, especially with like the Philips Hue device. And a lot of these bigger Samsung smart things, all of these devices talk to some kind of API to register you. And beyond that, they send out a lot of information to the device that's just clear text and just a nightmare. Insecure mobile interface as well, so they'll have some kind of API sometimes, otherwise they'll just send telnet or whatever command through there. And to some extent on the Linux machines, you can set up your security fairly decently. The Raspberry Pi, you can do a lot with that, but if you have a very tiny device like that's going around, there isn't that much setup that you can do. The setup is done by your firmware, well, not your firmware, but whatever script you're writing and initiating on startup. You have to have that secure, otherwise it's just lost. Insecure software and firmware, and also most of these devices don't actually check what firmware you're sending it. So they'll just install it. If it runs, it runs. There's no hashing, checking a hash, none of that. And then also poor physical security. Although, I mean, if you already have physical access to a device, you know, it's done. A lot of UART, all kinds of pins just left on the device. So let's talk about the minor a little bit. And this is where it gets interesting. So luckily Grant gave me this device to have a look at, because supposedly he wants to automate his house. Now, either by design or purely because they didn't think about it, I couldn't actually find it on Shodan through looking at HTTP banners or anything like that. But I did find that the actual forum recommended opening port 2000 on your Wi-Fi at home so that you could talk to that device from wherever on the app. So what's unique about this device is it has to have iOS or Android, an app to actually talk to it, and it looks like this. Anyone, you can see it. So essentially what it is a Wi-Fi chip with electronic relays, so you can switch things on and off. So it's a very basic home automation or IoT device. It was a Kickstarter project that did quite well. It looks like that, low power, and that's what the app looks like. So the app is interesting. You can set timers, you can set a bunch of things. It's very basic. You can set a new password for it and stuff like that, but it's not very straightforward way to actually find that. And that's essentially the chip that runs it. And what makes this fun is that all the commands are online. So luckily it's very open. The MyNode itself, there's almost very little documentation. But if you actually look inside, you can find a lot about it. And that's essentially how it works. So it uses UART commands. It uses that $triple to start command mode. And then the Wi-Fi, you know, is sort of the medium to transmit it through. So if we get to that. Okay, so we connect it to the MyNode. Yeah, I will. So this is the device straight out of the box, by the way. So I kind of and it didn't screw up, but I set quite a few features on his other one. So I actually asked him to bring the other one today so that I could actually show you out of the box what it does. And now, I got stuck here for a while because I was like, what is this doing? And I went and read up about the device and I found that. So then things start getting, get interesting, because you've got shell access to the whole device. Let's have a look at, for instance,
Just remember, you tell that to
on a non-standard port, but
the form says make port 2000 available from the internet so that the app can connect. Via telephone.
so anyone want to have a look at what's going on there? If you wish. But the thing is though, I just connected to this device via Wi-Fi without that passphrase. So before you actually set up this device, it's open, completely open. And only after you actually take the app and set the password, or actually telnet into it and change it, then it sets a Wi-Fi password that's also the telnet password. And I'm not expecting any average user to go and actually set this up, right? Because it never tells you to do that. And I mean, after that, I can really just start saying set, WLAN password. And it's also quite easy when you find something like this. Gives you every command possible that this device actually runs. So the thing is that they had to go with low cost because it's a crowdfunding project, right? And they implemented as much as they possibly could, but beyond that, this is the average consumer is going to use this and think, perfect, wonderful device, and somebody just connected, lovely. And have a look there. So what we find, first of all, is that the Wi-Fi firmware is on there. And then if you've actually gone and read their forums, they are working on a web app, but it's not actually implemented yet because the cloud infrastructure isn't there. And I haven't been able to get all of this off the device yet, and I'm assuming that if I did, that would make would be very interesting, because then you have the WPS app, you've got everything there that the actual Android device talks to. And beyond that, I mean, it's a device this size. I don't expect, and it comes in a box like this. So beyond actually just switching it on and bolting it to your wall, I don't really expect anyone to do much more with it. So that's that. And I haven't really gotten much further into that.
Primarily the first one, and I only gave him the second one.
And also because I don't really want to brick it, because he might actually still use it, right?
What's the length of that pass race? Maximum length?
Say again?
What's the maximum length of the pass race you're doing there?
I think it's just WPS, so it's even lane, right? If I'm connected now.
How many of those units were shipped?
I actually never checked, but quite a lot.
The Kickstarter, I think. I'll check.
Okay, so then moving along. Then we get to the ESP8266. Now, this device is a little bit more interesting and unique because that's the actual size, and it's been going around. It runs a full TCP/IP stack. It's got Wi-Fi. You can upgrade the firmware, so it has a firmware very, very similar to the kind of operation on the Minor, but then you can put Node on it or Lua script, which makes it a lot easier to use. and it has firmware upgrades over the air, which I managed to get to work, but unless you switch it on, it's not of much use. And the thing is, you have to remember, this kind of device is actually designed to go with an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. So the pins on there, it's not really designed to go on its own, although you can build something with it. So let's have a look if it's actually running. Yeah.
Can you stop it wrong?
Could be, or I changed it. So let me just have a quick look.
So 963 backers pledged $102,000 to that project. So when you think about it, actually that was a minor investment. Big time change in the full
So that's actually what's running right now. So not the OTA server part, but to actually just run that, the ESP8266 is rather simple code. It's a BSidesCapeTown.
So we were just saying, the great thing about this is you get all this crowdfunding, you create a device that's fully secure, so you can get even more money from it.
Exactly, and they're building, the funny thing is they set up on the crowdfunding side different tiers of, if you pledge this much, this, and if the project reached certain points, they would do like a cloud interface and stuff like that. And remember, these are people doing it in their own sort of time, or running a company, or trying to keep a company, so that's on that device. So I just set up a basic, I was going to try and do a submit and save to a file or something like that, but I didn't get quite far enough. But that's on a device that size that's been going around. And lo and behold, there's a lot of these on the internet. You will be surprised. Like you saw earlier with his Wi-Fi credentials on it. And if you can push firmware over the air to that, you can still keep that page there, but you could do whatever you want. It has different modes. You can put it in soft AP mode. My next project will be a bit more sinister with it, dropping devices all over the place. And the actual code for it is rather straightforward, setting it up, putting it in the mode. The actual page itself, looks like that. There is some limit to the size of the HTML that you can actually run in it. I haven't quite figured out. I know my little brother got a lot further with this, and you can put the NCMU firmware on it that runs Node, and that has a lot of more capability to it. But this isn't a very high-end device, and you find it on the internet a lot connected. One thing about Shodan that I quite enjoyed is that it tells you exactly to which ISP it's connected, and a lot of times it'll have Comcast cable or something like that. So it's really easy to identify that it's at someone's home. I mean, this is the kind of features that's pushed into a device like that. And at the end of the day, it's up to the developer to write decent code. Otherwise, you're just throwing out devices and people connecting to it. So there's a script to do over-the-air updates in both PHP and Python. There's a whole bunch of projects. And you can actually program this with the Arduino IDE as well, which makes it interesting. So that's about as far as I got that I can show. Some other things I'd rather not show. And how do you actually fix this? It's a hard issue, especially from the embedded side, because of the size and power of the devices. It's a little hard to actually fix it. This guy had a good idea of how, especially ESP8266, to use a Raspberry Pi in between as a sort of VPN or SSH tunnel, and had a bunch of different things that you could use. Because especially if it's at your home, you don't really need to connect directly to the device. Set up a VPN. I don't have it here. Asus makes a router these days that has a built-in VPN functionality. So for someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, it's not that hard to set up something like that. Quite honestly, don't connect something that you don't want on the internet. And scan your network to make sure you don't have anything leaking, all kinds of stuff. Upgrade the firmware. A lot of these devices had terribly outdated firmware, terribly outdated versions of Apache, and the developers are limited in resources and time, so it's rather hard for them to actually do it properly. I've looked a lot at Ubuntu Snappy Core. They're building an IoT Linux operating system that's supposed to be designed secure by default. The ESP8266 has a lot of open source firmware upgrades as well. Make sure that your firmware actually checks that it's, well, your device actually checks the right firmware. And FTP, so I never actually got to that. That was also an interesting thing about So another interesting thing about the Nerd, my Nerd, and a lot of these phone app-based devices is that they try and do everything from the app itself. For instance, the firmware upgrades go through the app. So it's rather difficult to actually upgrade this because I assume if you just put the Wi-Fi firmware up on it, it's going to probably wipe out all the modified stuff they put on it. I can connect to it. Anyway, there's a setting in it for FTP, and that's how usually they upgrade the firmware with it. And on this device, it's pointing at itself, port 23, to a public directory. So I'm assuming you copy it over the air to that directory and just installs it. So whatever has the word Wi-Fi EZX and .image on it will just upgrade it. There's an interesting, I forgot to put the link in this, but a guy did a talk where he took a Raspberry Pi and he set it up with stuff like Snort and Tripwire. He's actually from Tripwire, and then also set up Elasticsearch and Kibana so that he could actually track what's going on his network. So he would put the Raspberry Pi connected to the internet and have all the other devices connected to the Raspberry Pi. That gave him some idea of what was actually going on, and he could graph it. Seemed to work really well. And in terms of that, if you then find some weird kind of, if you find weird traffic or anything happening on the device, probably a good idea just to cut it out of the network completely until you know what actually happened. This is kind of what he set up, or the idea of it, because as we know, the smart TV and fridges aren't quite the best idea. And then he also set it up with SMS alerts and stuff like that. Categorizing your data is sort of something that I help. I mean, it's quite dangerous to have your HVAC system like on the internet and webcams, but I actually didn't want to cover webcams. Probably you can look at stage trading and just have secure trading practices. Not a lot of the data on these kinds of devices are usually we're there to just trying to get a feature out for and test the device. That's probably a good idea as well. And another thing is that a lot of these devices are either connected to an API, a cloud interface, and what they call machine-to-machine management solutions. There's a lot of those online. And you're much like with web applications and mobile applications, you end up having so many third-party connections that it's hard to keep track of what's going on. And that's sort of that. Any questions?
Have you looked at the
devices secured with what is yet installed with Windows 10 IoT core?
So I started looking for that. Funny enough, there's some on XP still. There's a couple of companies that did a lot of home automation on Windows. I haven't really found Windows 10 IoT yet, but I know about it.
The securing also most ATM drivers run on Windows XP.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem. They don't really do much for securing.
Just a question I've had for a while. Typically when we connect them to the internet, well, in our context we have the root that, say, for, I would say, comes from telecom and NACs all traffic and by default ports are open. So you port 80 are open to manage all of the but typically we have one entry point and then everything behind that. How is it that there are so many devices like EXP that are connected directly to the public actor? How do people get that wrong? Am I just very sheltered in the way I see?
So that depends. So some of these devices are designed to be thrown out in a field and left on their own, right? So they probably have 3G or something like that. As far as I know, most of these are just people opening up all their ports out to the open world, like bypassing the router. It's a good question, and also, like, I didn't go too deeply into that. I didn't want to scratch around people's networks too much, but the thing is, a lot of these devices have a whole host of ports open, and a lot of times when I found something, I also found a lot of other services running. So I think they're just opening up their ports to let it out, and it's sometimes you find mail servers in between, and it might be that this guy actually set up his ESP8266 in a data center for some odd reason. There was a couple of data centers names that I saw, but I wasn't quite sure what was going on there. But a lot of it's like people at home just setting up hobbies, and like especially the ESP8266, a lot of the people just trying to see what they can do with it, set up sensors and put it on the internet, and it's kind of like, hey, look what I did.
And they just switch off everything until it works.
Yeah, pretty much. That's kind of exactly like you'll see, oh, there's Apache and Nginx and everything running here. That's probably not the ESP8266.
Did you set up in your own devices and how many spots to know and see who's using?
Not yet. That'll be I wanted to do it with a Raspberry Pi, but I ran out of time. So the idea with the Raspberry Pi is it has a lot more power to it, so you can actually try and do IDS kind of stuff. One thing I forgot to add up in was I quite like the idea of things open canary tokens. If you can implement something like that on an embedded device, at least then you can get some kind of warning that someone's on the device. Just point it out to an IP or do a DNS request or something, so that you at least just have a warning. And in terms of that, maybe think like a bank. Some banks, what they'll do is if they find anything weird on the system, just destroy it or boot it off. Like switch off what isn't doing what it should. I mean, if you're going to set up your air cons and stuff on the roof that are also in the same proximity as every other device and router in your company, maybe, think about it before. Yeah.
This might be slightly off topic and maybe more of a theoretical question, but you guys have been at least throwing around the idea of the bill that about cybersecurity and that.
Yeah.
So what I would like to just throw out there and ask you maybe, in your research, how do you differentiate yourself from a hacker as a researcher? Or if you had to, I don't know, justify that in court, let's say, or if you had to build this into the bill, like what kind of protection would you want to give yourself without giving the loophole for someone else who's just hacking to have, that exit clause? And maybe more pertinent is where do you draw the line? Because these devices that you're hacking are personal devices, right? So they're not implemented on a big corporate network where you can disclose the vulnerability to the company and that. So yeah, maybe if you can just tell us where you draw the line and how you would in the bill.
Yeah, okay, good point. So, yeah, so a lot of what I did was mostly scanning and just having a look. So I didn't really, unless like with the fuel stations, that is open. So you connect it and pretty much just shows you everything, but I wouldn't set anything. So the cybercrime bill makes it difficult because it talks a lot about like accessing or intercepting or, you know, having passwords and stuff. So that device just showed me the password, I have it now. But the problem with the bill is that it doesn't quite look at intent. And I think intent's the biggest thing because
so sorry to interrupt you, but that's exactly what I want to kind of get at. So you have got a different intent from an attacker.
Exactly.
So how do you prove it? How do you prove it in a way that an attacker can't use that same, you know,
the problem is one of philosophy, because you've got in essence in computing there's two philosophies. There's a proprietary one that says the person who made the software knows best, and therefore he should be the only one that touches the stuff. Then there's the open source philosophy, which says actually we don't want that kind of approach. We want to have the code available to everyone so we can make the best possible product for the people that are out there. So the answer that you get will depend upon what your particular philosophy is, and the people that are drawing the bill, their philosophy is a proprietary one. They just want you to stop. They just want to stop you doing this stuff. Period. Which creates a massive problem, because then you've got a situation in which the state can pretty much do whatever it likes, without you having any say whatsoever. And the moment you try and do anything whatever, if it even remotely resembles a hack or a crack, as a hacker would say, then you're in trouble.
So my question is just maybe...
So here's one thing, right? The biggest problem with the bill is that you're sort of guilty until you're proven innocent. If that's switched around, at least then you can go ahead. So I think maybe disclosing to companies is a good start, at least having that email record. And then I know in the bill the government's talking about a cyber center and a disclosure sort of channel so that they can actually address it from their side. Now, that's good and all, but that depends on how much they actually set it up. The biggest problem in our courts is our courts are still paper-based. So even if I try and go and prove that I was doing it well, I have to go print out everything I did. And that will take me time, it'll take the judge time to read. So it is difficult. I think like what the government actually has to do is set a standard for this is how you secure your network, this is what we see as, well, a framework, not a standard, a framework of what is, you know, fine, what's not, and then have the right cyber command in place so that if you find something really damning, that you can give it over to them. But yeah, I think we're all getting sort of a little more paranoid and just protect yourself, because whistleblowing is not at all protected in that bill, and disclosure and stuff like that. So I'd potentially say, not in a bad way, but use Tor, cover your tracks a little bit, write up notes on what you're doing. So it's a difficult one. I can't really answer it yet. The biggest problem also with the bill is that the definitions don't even make sense. So it's hard for me to go and prove something. A database, I think, was stated that it is a structured, it's a set of structured data stored on a storage medium. So, you know, that's a database, right? It has a storage medium on it with structured data.
I think the biggest problem is like, as computing needs to trust you most of us are, if we're having trouble like making clear-cut understanding of the definitions in the bill, how is a lawyer speaking to a judge, you know, handle these lawyers?
So that's actually the answer to your question, right? Our legal system is a judge makes the decision. The bill is written, the judge has to decide that you're innocent. So it's reversed. So that needs to be corrected.
Grant, how does it differ from physical security? Because if you are trespassing on somebody's property, it doesn't really matter what's your intent. You know, you can come there with, I'm going to, water these flowers or whatever, but you're still trespassing. So how is that differ? I'm in somebody's system. Hey, I'm only here to look around. But
the difference is if you come into my garden, water my flowers, you tell me this, I won't prosecute you for trespassing. And I, as the aggrieved party, have to.
Yeah, but if ADT shows up, they're not going to make it.
But ADT aren't going to take you to jail, right?
Yeah, no, but I mean, the thing is, unless you have permissions to be in somebody else's system, you have no. You have no point.
Agreed. How many of you guys are developers? Okay, so the bill says you cannot introduce a vulnerability. How many of you want to be developers after this third line? You can't write that code.
Also, by definition, Bugzilla is a malware hoarding facility.
There it is, yeah.
Look, I think at the end of the day, you also have to check your own ethics. I did not go and change anything that I don't physically have access to and ask for. I just had a look around, which I suppose has its own issues. But I mean, a lot of these like Internet of Things devices, they wouldn't have had firmware upgrades if no one had a look at them at least. I mean, that bunny, there's been reports of people screaming at kids through the bunny. Okay, so like if we have to be careful as well, then a company must also to some extent be liable for not securing something as well.
Plus, there's plenty of case law dating from well before now, whereby a hacker or cracker, whatever, has been taken to court and been fined millions of dollars for what they did, and the information that they discovered was actually openly available on the web. AT&T was a classic example of that. And so basically, what happens is you go from a situation where the courts are there to protect the vulnerable to a situation in which large corporations dictate the law. And that's the very worrying thing about the way the modern world is going, because it's going in a direction where the individual is no longer protected by the society in which it's usable to consult. Exactly.
So how do you think cybercrime today would be prosecuted? Anybody have any idea?
Badly.
Okay.
Are you talking about the act or cybercrime at the moment?
So if I break into your company and I steal the data from it, what will I be charged with if they catch me?
No, but the ECJ has been around for a long time, so ECJ has been there and people have been prosecuted in terms of ECJ. So
Yes.
you guys are beginning, there's a lot of stuff that's happened in the past.
Exactly.
And there has been some successful things in the ECJ.
Exactly.
Well, I find this argument and your response is incredibly emotional sometimes, where maybe we need to think a little bit more logically and take a step back in some cases about this. That's my opinion on the answer. I read the 31 pages. And yes, it's very interesting because what is a hacker? Probably everyone in this room is hacked at some point, without even knowing it sometimes. And what are we going to do individually? Each one of us to decide individually whether we feel comfortable that we can actually go down the path of investigating these tools because we can possibly get into huge stuff.
My point is there is already protection in place for these crimes, right? The crimes have always existed from the moment
But they've
they
rewritten
were
the
made.
cybercrime bill is often rewrite these yet.
Yes.
So that stuff is being the same. You guys are forgetting that it's the same 10 years ago. They're just trying to make it a bit better, and they're trying to make it more government. They're trying to put it.
Well, what they're really trying to do is increase penalties for specific. So the idea was penalties on infrastructure that is actually critical to our country. They want to build having the hard. So if you take down telecom, that's worse than if you take down my company, right? But they have changed the approach. It's no longer you are innocent until we prove that you're guilty, because it's really hard to prove. It's really innocent.
Just really 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
Have you read the act by any chance?
Sorry?
Have you read the act?
Of course I do.
The thing is, I know like people get worked up, but this is
by writing something like that, they can make whatever they want with it. It's public participation. If we sit back and a couple of years later we sit in a court and we're like, damn it. But there is a need for that bill. We all know that. The government's getting knocked over every now and then from overseas. But then, for instance, the time between they actually published it and comments is so short, they haven't really consulted with private companies. So they're dictating most of what's going on. And the last time the government set minimum standards for information security in their departments was 1996. So the problem we have is that a lot of it has to be redrafted just so that we don't have those loopholes or are interpreted as such and such. I mean, we want to help government as well, but we can't do it if they're not involving us. And a lot of laws, you can publicly participate with it, right?
Do we know for a fact that happens engaged with private institutions around the jobs of that book?
Yes, we do.
Was it just a few guys saying we're going to be in the first place?
So they had a couple of guys on a board, and then after that they never met.
So the individuals who were supposed to be participating in that, one of them is actually the guy who's supposed to
Mark Hay, he's an advocate from CISSP, and he helped write copy. So he also has issues with the fact that privacy is not at all included in Act, yet copyright laws. Copyright, the thing is that is a separate issue, and that's also part of the problem. Is
So
let's
it's about the kind of motivation why they do up the book. Why do copyright not right? Who are
Well,
the
so that it's not about protecting people, it's about protecting.
business interests.
But anyway, guys,
But just a quick thing, there was a private
sorry.
consultation phase that did consult with companies. It was predominantly investigators and digital forensic practitioners.
It was probably quite short.
were you guys involved?
It was about 2 months.
Were you guys involved?
We declined involvement.
The thing is, it's a bit rushed. But we all have different opinions, and that's also public participation, right?
But I think that the fact that it reverses the onus of computer.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem.
That's the big one. How on earth can they change the law so that you're guilty until proven innocent? What kind of law is that?
Because it's hard to prove.
The problem
They
is,
can't-
So it probably will get knocked down constitutional.
I take a bunch of logs of my server, I put the IP that's, your home, and I say you go to a judge, the judge says, okay, we get an order on. There's a case like that, Mark Hay told us of a guy who tried to disclose his own company, what was going on, and they eventually got a guy with one Microsoft certification to be a witness to a judge who then got a court order to search his home, took even his friend's phone who was on the location, and now they have a warrant that he can't even leave the country. Like, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to prevent that kind of situation, so that we can actually lock up the guys that are actually causing us harm.
So the biggest problems with the bill will be sorted out in courts. They will. The problem is that guys like
The
Mr.
first four
Michael
guys.
to deal with the court cases that would eventually lead to it being
I don't think any of us disagree that there should be more time on the input and we should take more from us. I just think sometimes maybe we need to rationally think of our responses and try and fight like that. I don't agree with that guilty thing. It doesn't necessarily say that. Maybe that's my opinion. I've read it. I don't believe that it says guilty. It says that we shouldn't do that. We're trying to stop all security professionals from doing things, and maybe we can prove that.
It does shift the.
well, okay, so that is a matter of reason. Okay.
Anyway, thanks.
What